So, hello everyone. Thank you for coming this afternoon. We're going to talk about a topic that I know is near and dear to everyone who is on the call today. I'm very happy to have my very good friend Michael Gunnan here today to talk about the Lsat. You can see his fantastic overeducated credentials right there. And I say that as a joke because you all know that I say I'm overeducated as well. So he and I are peas in a pod in that regard. But he's got some really high-powered credentials. And the great thing about Mike at this point in time is that he's been devoting a lot of his attention to doing private tutoring of Lsat. And so he, during the pandemic, has done quite a bit of introspection and some hands-on about what the Lsat looks like right now. So before I turn this over to Mike, I know that there's something that everybody here is very interested in, and that's when the tests are going to be. Here are the Lsat dates for 2021, 2022. And you can see that one of the things that happened right off the bat, I've been encouraging everyone to take the July test. Well, there is no July test. The LSAC in their infinite wisdom decided to take this gap before they do the last Lsat Flex in the first of their new process of Lsat. And so the question is going to come up, you know, which test should I take? Should I do the Lsat Flex or should I look to August? We will answer that question as we go along. Everybody is different, but my gut instinct right now is that if you have not been aggressively preparing for June already, that you should take the summer and do the August Lsat because it will give you the time to fully prepare. What's the difference between the two? The June is the old Lsat Flex that we've been seeing, 3 sections, 1 of each, no break, on the computerized proctored version. The August test is going to be 4 sections. There are going to be 3 graded sections and an experimental section. So there isn't going to be any difference in the balance that you get. You'll still be graded, you know, 33.33% on each of the different types of questions. There will be a break in the middle, and that's a good thing. And also, I think one of the benefits just for people down the road is that the Lsat really needs those experimental sections so that they can do a better job of developing questions for the future by having tested it out in some way. And so, you know, it's one of those things that you'll be taking an extra section for the benefit of everyone else. And of course, at any point, if you want to have a conversation with me about which test you should take, feel free to make an appointment, come see me, we'll talk about it. The most important thing about August is that everybody wants to have a backup. So you're super ready on August 1st, you think this is going to be it, but something happens. I believe that the October test, since it's in early October, is an excellent fallback position. You will still be able to get all of your early applications in with a score from the October test. Okay, so with all of that being said, I am going to try to get back to my point where I am with the program. Yes, and so I will be taking questions from the chat. Mike is going to talk for about 30 minutes, give you some of his insights about the test. Put questions in the chat as we go along. And then when he's done, we'll do questions both ways. You can either, you know, put something in the chat, or you can do that little thing where you raise your hand and we'll answer questions in person. So without further ado, here I'm going to mute myself and turn my camera off, and here's my great friend Mike Gunnan.
All right. Well, it's good to be here virtually, and thank you, Dr. Kirby, for having me this evening. And what I thought I'd do tonight is we're going to be talking very generally about how best to prepare for the LSAT. And I thought I'd approach it by thinking about the biggest mistakes that I see people make. And so I'm just going to kind of run through a list of different problems that I see with, when people try to study for the LSAT, and kind of how to avoid them and the things to do instead. And so, like Dr. Kirby said, I will try to keep my comments short so that we have plenty of time for questions, and we'll just get into it. The biggest mistake that I generally see people make, when I talk to people and I say, okay, what have you done so far to prepare for the test? And they'll say things like, well, I asked all my friends what the best way to study for the test was. And then I got on all the different online forums and researched the best way of studying for the test. And then I turned my attention to books, and I read all the Amazon reviews of all the different prep books that are out there. And I made a long list of books that I wanted to buy. And then I bought the books because there's nothing that will make people feel better than to throw money at a problem. And so I bought all the books and waited till they arrived and created book space on my bookshelf. And that's what I've done. Now I'm ready to go. And then my response to that is, okay, you've done nothing. You have done no actual LSAT prep, because all of that stuff that you're talking about isn't LSAT prep, it's LSAT preparation. And people love to get hung up in the LSAT preparation phase. And the conceit or the idea is, well, if I just, make all the right decisions and pick the right class or the right books or whatever, then I'll be able to put everything on autopilot and it'll be easy from there. And that's not how it works. You need to get to the point pretty quickly where you're past the LSAT preparation and you're into the work. And so the mistake that I see people make is sort of too much strategizing and not enough doing. By the way, I'm going to, like I said, we're going to take questions at the end of this tonight. And I can just about guarantee that the first question that people are going to ask is, what's the best class or what's the best book? And I'm going to preempt that right now and say, I don't know. I don't care. I don't take LSAT prep classes. I don't read LSAT prep books. Again, I think it's sort of a fool's errand to try to approach it that way anyway. My feeling on all of it is, if there really were a best class or a best book, people would have figured that out by now. And, if you think about year after year, thousands or tens of thousands of undergrads are asking that same question over and over. And you would think that if there really were a best book or a best class, that we would all know what that is at this point. And by the way, the reason I don't think there's a best book or a best class is that people are different. And you've probably heard the thing before where people will say, okay, I'm a visual learner, or I'm a text-based learner, or whatever. And that's really true. I mean, there's a lot of neuroscience behind the idea that different people process information in different ways. And so there is no sort of one-size-fits-all thing that's going to work for everybody. And so in any event, mistake number one is sort of too much strategizing and not enough doing. You need to get past the decision-making point and into the work. Okay. The next thing I see people do is, come up with a plan where they just study and study and study and read a bunch of different books and study all the different types of questions, and then they leave the practice tests until the very end. And that's exactly backwards. You need to make practice tests the focal point of your preparation, and everything else is ancillary. Okay. It's fine to consult other sources. It's fine to look at books or Khan Academy lectures or whatever, but the central focus of your preparation needs to be practice tests. And you need to take a lot of them, and you need to take them under real testing conditions, or as best you can approximate that. So you observe the time limits. You treat it as you do it all in one sitting, as opposed to saying, well, I'm going to do one section on Monday and another section on Tuesday or whatever. You need to get in the habit of taking the test as you're going to be doing it when you take the real test. There is quite a bit about it that you can't learn from the books. You need to work on things like time management. You need to work on your sort of decision-making processes. So, if you're looking at a question and you're not sure and you're trying to decide, okay, do I look at for another minute or so, or do I move on to the next question? Those are, is this a good point to be using elimination strategies or, kind of educated guessing strategies? There is no way to get a feel for all of that without doing the practice tests. Now, occasionally, I have known people to take too many practice tests. It doesn't happen that often, but I have known people who will just sort of move from one practice test to another without doing anything in between. And that's another mistake as well. After you take a practice test, you need to go back and look at the mistakes that you made and look for patterns and look to see what types of questions you're getting wrong, what kinds of problems you're having, and then you need to come up with strategies to address those things. Figure out how you're going to get better at certain types of questions, or if you're running out of time towards the end of this section, you need to kind of develop strategies for how you're going to do better next time. So it's not just putting in the hours. You want to be smart about how you kind of move from practice test to practice test, and with the idea of doing a little bit better each time. Another mistake that I see people make is letting their ego drive their performance, or letting their ego get kind of wrapped up in their LSAT preparation. And that can take a couple of different forms. I've talked to people that have said, okay, I've got to get a 165 or better. I just have to. Or everything will fall apart. My life is over if I don't get the 165 or whatever. And in general, I think it's a very bad idea to have hard targets like that. And I think the reason is that when you're taking the test, you just want to be focused on what's in front of you. You want to be focused on the questions and looking at each question and sort of saying, okay, how can I optimize my chances of getting this particular question right? In my experience, the people that have had hard targets, the problem is half of your brain is doing what I was just talking about, focusing on the questions, focusing on the tests. And the other half of your brain is sort of keeping score on how you think you're doing. And so people will say things like, oh, or will sort of think to themselves, oh, I think I might have missed 3 questions on the last game, and that means I've used up my margin of error. I have to, sort of run the table on the rest of this section. And again, I just think that's a really bad way to approach it, where half of your brain is taking the test and the other half of your brain is sort of keeping score and assessing whether you're hitting your target or not. And I think the better way to approach it is just to say, okay, everything I can do to increase my odds of getting this particular question right is going to help. And every question that I get right is going to increase my score. And the higher my score is, the more options I'm going to have. And so it's better to view it as sort of a spectrum thing rather than as sort of a threshold thing where you say, I have to hit this number, or, I have failed at this. The other way that I'll see people, kind of letting their ego get involved in the process, which in ways that are detrimental. Sometimes people will say, well, I ran out of time on the 4th reading because I spent too much time on the 2nd reading. And I'll say, okay, why did you do that? We had talked about time management and sort of, giving each reading its fair shot. So why did you get hung up on the 2nd reading? And they'll say, well, it was a psychology reading and I'm a psychology major. So I just really felt like I needed to ace that particular reading. And my response to that is, points are points, and you get them wherever you can get them. And you shouldn't approach the test with a lot of preconceived notions about, well, I should be able to do this part well, I should be able to ace this part, and all of that. Just take the test and don't worry about whether your performance is in line with how you think you ought to be doing. Because the LSAT is really tricky in a lot of ways, and a lot of times they will pair easy readings with hard questions, or a hard game with some easy questions sort of sprinkled into it. And so it's best not to, again, don't try to game it. Don't try to say, well, I'm going to get a whole bunch of points here, and that will allow me to, do a little bit worse on this other thing. Just do your best on every section and every question, and don't try to, kind of outthink the test makers. The test makers are smart people. They do this for a living, and you're better off just with a sort of clean, simple approach to the test, rather than kind of gaming out how you think you're going to hit your score. Okay. Another mistake that I'll see people make is they'll get kind of too wrapped up in the sort of the content and trying to learn everything they can about each of the individual types of questions or games or whatever, and they won't pay attention to the basics. And by that I mean, you will do better on the test if you have slept well the night before. You will do better on the test if you are reasonably relaxed and confident, and you have a sort of good frame of mind going into the test. I have not really known anybody who managed to stress their way to a good score. That's just generally not a good strategy. And you want to be comfortable enough with things going into it, like I say, that you're feeling good, and you're in a place where you can give each question the thought and the attention that it deserves. And so, again, I see too many people ignoring fundamental things like sleep and, going into it with a balanced mindset, time management, just basic fundamental things, because they're too wrapped up in the details or whatever. You cannot approach the LSAT the way that you would, say, a biology test. Okay. When you take a test for a class, the process is basically you learn the material, you study, and then you're given a chance to demonstrate your knowledge on the test. The LSAT is not a content-based test. It's a skill-based test. It is, and we can maybe talk about this a little bit later, but I'm not really of the opinion that the LSAT does what it's designed to do. And I think there are a lot of problems with the test, but at least the theory behind the test is that it doesn't test knowledge, it tests skills. It tests reading comprehension skills, it tests various kinds of analytical skills. And so, if you talk to people that work for LSAC, that they would tell you that the LSAT is more akin to an IQ test than it is to a biology test or a test that you would take for any other class. And so you want to try to get yourself away from the idea that you can study for it perfectly, that you can prep for it perfectly, and that if you just learn enough, then you'll be able to go in and do it. The test requires a certain amount of kind of mental flexibility and adaptability. And again, these are the skills that, like I said before, you only get through taking practice tests. You don't get them by reading books. You need to, develop these skills through the process of taking the practice tests. And then finally, I think the last mistake that I see people make in LSAT preparation is treating the LSAT preparation process as another thing on your to-do list. By which I mean, it's like, okay, I need to take a practice test, and then, people will sort of rush through it, and then like, okay, I need to go, do the other things on my to-do list. You really need, it's better to schedule your preparation. In other words, to, block out time for it like you would with a job or a class or anything else, and say, okay, Wednesday morning from 9 to 12, that's my day to take practice tests. And then, Thursday afternoon is my day to go over the results and see what I did wrong and come up with strategies to do better next time. If you don't block out the time for it, then I think you'll, and if you're just approaching it as another thing that you have to get done on any given day, you're going to have focus problems, you're going to have concentration problems, and just realize that this is, as Dr. Kirby alluded to, this is a time-consuming process. It's not something that most people can get done quickly. And so you need to treat it like you would a part-time job or a class or whatever, and be sure that you commit the time to it. And with that, I think it's just a little bit before 6, so we've just about hit the halfway point. And my understanding is Dr. Kirby is going to sort of read from the chat list and mediate the questions that you all have submitted, and I'll be happy to answer anything to the best of my ability.
So I'm looking for us to have some questions. I want everybody to either start tapping out questions now, or
I do see a hand raised.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, we're gonna.
Yes, I have a question. Would you say that having like a binder with all the mistakes that you made on the practice exam is good? That way you go over like what you missed?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds good to me. I don't. I'm not in the business of sort of dictating particular organizational strategies. By which I mean, if you use a binder because that's the best way for you to sort of collect all the relevant information in one place, if that works for you, then great. I don't know that if somebody else is used to working a little bit differently and they have their own system for it, I think that's fine as well. One way or another, though, the idea is, yeah, you want to be very cognizant of the patterns in the questions that you're missing. In other words, are you having trouble with inference questions in the reading comprehension section? Or do certain types of games give you trouble? Or do certain types of questions within the logical reasoning section give you trouble? And how you organize that information is up to you. But when you're moving from practice test 4 to practice test 5, you want to have a definite strategy for saying, okay, last time I missed this type of question a lot, and so my strategy for this type of question is going to be this, so that I can see if I can maybe get a higher percentage of them right. So I don't know if that completely answered your question, or if there was another piece to it that I forgot about. But yeah, however you want to organize that process is kind of up to you.
Yeah, that did answer my question. It was mostly about like the mistakes making on the practice test.
Right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
We got another hand raised there, and then I've got some in the chat as well. So let's take our hand raised first.
Okay.
Whoever that was, can we see who that is? That might be the same hand raised.
Yeah. If it was Belinda, that's the question we just answered.
So we have a number of questions here now about time management, which is something that you and I have talked about before. So one question here is, and I'll kind of combine these two. Let's start with Heidi. Is how far in advance should we start prepping for the initial exam? And then if he asks on average, how many hours per week should we be studying? So that's kind of it. How many hours per week and how far in advance of the exam? And you and I can both give opinions about that.
Yeah. I'm going to take the question about how far in advance first. There is nothing wrong in my mind with taking a practice test this weekend. If you're not familiar with the test, and you don't have a feel for kind of what baseline you're starting out from, I would get on the LSAC website and take the free practice test that's posted there. Now, I think there will be other people that will say, oh, you should do a little bit of work on the different types of questions first. But I'm a big believer in sort of jumping right into it. And then you'll, when you get the results of that back, and say, okay, I didn't have any idea which way was up on the games, but I kind of did okay on the reading comprehension. That will give you a feel for how much work needs to be done. And by the way, I haven't really ever talked to anybody that said, I got started on the preparation process too early. I've talked to a lot of people that have said I got started on the prep process too late, and so my inclination is always to say, again, just get going on it, because if, like, the worst thing that can happen if you go too early, so-called, is then you'll sort of hit the range of where you think you need to be before it's time to take the test. And that's a really easy problem to fix. I mean, you just kind of keep taking practice tests so you don't get out of practice, but you can kind of hit that equilibrium where everything else that you have is just sort of kind of maintenance work, and that's a much easier problem to fix than, oh, I got started too late, and as it turns out, to do well on the on the reading comprehension section, I'm going to need to kind of beef up some of my reading comprehension skills. And that's not the sort of thing that you can take care of in a couple of weeks. And so, again, I've seen a lot more people get sort of jammed up by not leaving enough time. I've never really seen anybody have to deal with the problem of being ready too early.
Okay, I want to
sure.
interject here, because this is someplace where you say jumping right into the practice test. I'm going to the same place that you are, which is, go to the LSAC, the website where it says the Lsat, and then it says Lsat Prep, and on that pull down menu, they have a couple of free practice tests. But within that free part of the Lsat Super Prep, they do have a little bit of information about each of the questions and some kind of right answer, wrong answer things. So for somebody who's not familiar with it, I think it's good to go through that part of their Super Prep and then take one of their practice tests, or take the link to the Khan Academy is below there, and to take the Khan Academy diagnostic test. And that's just where you and I disagree. I agree that you should get that baseline pretty early, but I just hate the idea of going into the test completely cold.
Well, and I guess where I'm coming from on it is, like I said, I've seen it happen too many times where people get caught up in trying to learn everything they can about all the different types of questions, through, like, studying the sort of super prep books and the reference materials that you were talking about. And
it's not a super reference material at all. It's just basically,
sure,
here's the basics of what each type of question is like, and here's some samples. Now take this practice test.
Right.
So it's not a real.
So, I mean, you're talking about something that could be done in not very much time. And so I think either way, we're talking about, don't put the practice test off, is what I'm saying. Don't get so down the rabbit hole of trying to learn what you can about the different questions that you keep procrastinating on the practice tests. Again, I've seen too many people try to do it that way, and you don't learn about the time management piece of it. You don't learn the right sort of decision-making processes that you're going to have to know to be able to do well.
Which is a
one
very
thing
good
we should
point.
say, kind of in connection with all of this, is that the test changes all the time. And they do that on purpose because they don't want people to be able to treat it like they would a biology test. They don't want people to be able to study for the test. And so they're always coming up with new types of questions, different types of games and things like that. And again, that's why I think the focus should always be on the practice rather than, trying to learn the types of questions that they've included on previous tests.
And I have always agreed with that. And it's one of the issues I have with like Kaplan and Princeton Review and those types of expensive courses is they focus so much just on different strategies. We have 83 different strategies for this kind of question, rather than just, practicing my experience is the students that I know who have done the best on the LSAT took the most practice tests. And so that kind of bears out, what you're saying is true. On the idea, something you and I talked about of, how much in advance should you start prepping and how much time should you spend? One of the rules of thumb that I have heard is treat it like you would treat one of your classes. So if you're looking at that you're taking a class this semester and you spend, 3 hours during the week in class, and how much time you spend studying, and preparing and reading and such, spend that, make that kind of your time target for how much time you spend studying for the LSAT per week. However, I would say, look at one of your harder classes. Spend the amount of time you're spending on con law and not the amount of time you're spending on basket weaving. And I think that, we kind of talked about the how far in advance to prep, but I would like to kind of put at it from the perspective of emphasize what you said about what is not enough time. So, to quantify it, I like for people to have, a solid 3 months in advance of the test to work with their own schedules. So that in 2 months we'll do 2, but try to have as much lead time as you have, which is my concern about the June test, that if you're talking about right now, 1st of April, 1st of May, middle of June, you could decide, okay, I'm good for the June test, but you've also got your schoolwork to take care of as well. And guess what? Your GPA is still important. Yeah. I hate it when people sacrifice the other important number, the GPA,
right.
to the LSAT
do not do
number.
that.
Do not do that.
Yeah.
So,
and I think, a lot of the answers to the questions that, that people have, which I think are very good questions. And I think a lot of my answers are going to sort of sound amorphous, like it depends, or, it's different for different people. But unfortunately, that's the way it is. Now, I think at a minimum that we're, you need to be in a position where you can do at least 1 and maybe 2 practice tests a week. Okay, and so you add that up. That's that's already, you've kind of got what, like maybe 6 or 7 hours right there, and then you need the time to go back over your the questions that you missed and look for the patterns and kind of do the analysis. That's another kind of hour or 2, and you know, to the extent that you're going to look at Khan Academy videos or look at books or do any kind of ancillary outside preparation, that's time there too. You know, as we're talking about it, as we're describing the process, you can sort of see the hours adding up, right? And I think that the other thing is that you need to be flexible in the sense that, you know, let's say you start out saying, okay, I'm going to dedicate 10 hours a week or whatever it is to LSAT prep. If that's not working and you're not making the headway that you need to, then you may need to up that hourly total. Now, maybe not. I mean, maybe there's something else kind of going on there. And instead of just, you know, kind of pouring more hours into it, you need to sort of step back and think about ways of working smarter rather than harder, or, you know, using your time efficiently. But it's not the sort of thing where we can just write a prescription and say, okay, if you do 10 hours a week for 8 weeks, you'll be fine. We can't really know that in advance. And so, you know, you need to be kind of prepared to put in whatever number of hours it takes.
So I think we've got a hand raised, but I kind of want to get to talk about, I think we've kind of answered the question of Yerli's about how much time do you recommend to take between practice tests? So I think you were talking about taking a couple a week. And how do you feel about, as you get closer to the test, about accelerating that some?
Yes, I think that's, I think a lot of people do it that way. And especially if your schedule is such that, like the situation you were talking about a little earlier, where it's April now, somebody wants to get started on the August test now. Well, you know, assuming that that you have more time during the summer than you do at the end of the spring semester, then yeah, that's a very natural progression to sort of start out by getting your feet wet, and putting a little bit of time into it now, and then kind of ramping that up as you get closer to the test. Yeah, that works out for a lot of people.
Okay, then here's this question before we get, I think it was Chase who had a question there.
Mm-hmm.
What do you recommend to work on time management skills? And I'm going to kind of say, are we talking about time management in terms of answering the questions within the allotted time? Or are we talking about time management in terms of studying? So I'm going to ask Fernanda to clarify that question in the chat. Time management in terms of answering the questions.
Yeah.
Within the allotted time.
One of the things, a lot of times when people have time management problems, it's because they've poured too much time and energy into something, right? Like whether it was a particularly difficult reading or a particularly difficult question or whatever. And so one of the ways that I think you can kind of keep moving effectively is don't double down on the hard questions. All right. You know, don't let yourself get bogged down in a particularly difficult or time consuming question, because from a sort of cost benefit analysis perspective, it's not worth it. The worst thing that can happen is, you know, you've got this really hard question, and you know that historically you've had problems with it, and so you double down, you spend a lot of time on it, and you get it wrong anyway. And then you've used up a bunch of time that you could have used more profitably on questions that play to your strengths, you know, assuming you have enough time to kind of deal with them properly. And so I think you want to get into the mindset where you realize that it's okay to have a least favorite type of question. You don't unless your target score is a 180, in which case, best of luck to you with that.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, there's a little bit of play in the system, right, for you to kind of prioritize things in terms of, you know, the chances that you're going to get it right in the first place. So yeah, don't double down on the hard questions. And in fact, when you get to the hard questions, I think that's a good time to be like, okay, you know, I'm going to try some elimination strategies. I'm going to do some educated guessing. I'm going to, you know, sort of do the best I can with this question on a sort of superficial level, move on to the next one. One of the things that people may not know about the test, and we don't know exactly how it works because LSAC is famously non-transparent and their grading system is proprietary and all of that. But one of the things that we know about standardized testing in general is not all questions are weighted equally. And this may surprise people, but it's actually more important to get the easy questions and the medium range questions right than it is to get the hard question. If you miss a hard question, then it could be that that question was in there to distinguish between the 179s and the 180s. It's just not that important for everybody else's overall score anyway. So you want to, the best way to kind of deal with that time management thing is say, okay, I'm going to make sure that I'm leaving time for myself to deal with the questions that play to my strengths and that I think I can get right. And I'm not going to sweat the super difficult ones.
That's fascinating. I mean, that's really interesting to know that there's some questions out there, you know, that are just not worth the effort because they're weighted toward the higher people. Okay, so let's see what Chase's question was.
Okay, actually, you pretty much almost addressed it, basically, like with what you have just been saying, like with that. But my question, like, kind of builds off of that because I had just taken the previous one back in February, and my largest problem was time management. And like, I thought I would be able to just answer every question and then, like, equally, like to myself, be like, okay, I'll at least give it a shot and then go through it. But like looking back on it now, I'm like, I was in that boat. I'm just wasting so much time on a question that it's only maybe like worth 2 points or something like that. So like, would it be worthwhile to like keep in mind how many like questions I need to get right in a section, or is that just something like to like not think about? Or
yeah, I'm not a big fan of saying, okay, you know, like I said, I'm not a big fan of target scores.
yeah,
And
yes,
I'm also not a big fan of like sort of subdividing it where you say, okay, my goal is to get 5 out of the 8 questions on every reading right. I think anything that involves sort of keeping score in your head as you're going along is distracting from the work of doing the best you can with the question that's in front of you at any given time. So now in terms, but I think, and again, I hate to keep beating this drum, but this is another reason why the practice tests themselves are just super important, because you can't solve a time management problem in one test. I mean, that's, you know, if you think of LSAT preparation as sort of like working out, you know, nobody expects to be able to go from, you know, lifting 10 pounds to lifting 100 pounds in 1 week. You know, that's a skill that you are necessarily going to have to develop gradually, and it's going to takes some deliberate effort, but there is, a lot of it's not rocket science. I mean, if you are consistently not having enough time for the fourth reading, you can tell yourself, okay, I've got 4 readings, I've got 36 minutes. That's basically, or I'm sorry, 35 minutes. So it's, basically 8 minutes per reading plus a little bit of time at the end. And say, okay, on my next practice test, I am going to try to get a lot closer to 8 minutes per reading. And if part of the problem is you feel like you may be reading too slowly, well, I used to teach developmental reading, and we would literally do timed reading exercises. You can force yourself to read faster. And so a lot of it is just being intentional about saying, okay, this is a problem I had on the last test. I'm going to prioritize it this time around. One of the other interesting things is that people always think that there is a trade-off between speed and accuracy, and that is not always true. And in fact, they've done studies with respect to reading in particular that people who read fast also tend to read well. And so part of it, I think, is just kind of getting over your fears of saying, well, if I do this too quickly, I'm necessarily going to, suffer in terms of the comprehension or the accuracy or whatever. It's a practice test. So the great news is you can just give it a shot and see what comes of it.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, that helps a lot.
I think there's another hand raised, but first, there are a couple of questions here about gap years. And so probably Mike is not going to answer those questions.
Right, that's you.
Because and if you ask him, even if I wasn't here, he would say to you, that's a Dr. Kirby question about if you should take a gap year. And so then I'm going to say to Hadia, you and I will talk about the circumstances that would, under which it's a good idea to take a gap year. And I will tell you all kinds of plus minus about making that decision. Aya, though, says if I plan to take a gap year so I can focus on applying, what do you think is the best time to take the LSAT? In the spring before I graduate, or during the fall semester in the beginning of the gap year? I'm going to start off, I don't know if Mike has an opinion about that, but I'm going to say it depends. I'm going to give it the lawyer answer that he and I are both so ready with. Because if you are working during the time that you're in your gap year, you just want to make sure that you have the space that we're talking about for preparation. So it's going to be a decision that you'll have to make at the point in time that you have decided what you're going to do during your gap year. I tend to go towards always take it during the summer and early fall before the time you plan to apply. Gap year, no gap year, but just always try to have that strategy that I'm going to do this when I have plenty of time in advance of when I'm going to be applying. I've had people who take it a year in advance, and I don't think that that's what matters. What matters is the quality of the time you have in advance of when you're going to take the test. Mike, you got any opinion on
No, not really. I mean, those are very individualized decisions that depend a lot on, your schedule and your situation and all of that. From a sort of a purely test-taking perspective, the idea, you do want to leave yourself time to retake. And of course, retaking is never the goal. But what I find, and I may have mentioned earlier that I'm a big believer in basic things like sleep and having the right attitude going into the test, those things really mattering a lot. And what I've found is that if you have that fallback position, you are less likely to need it, because having the fallback gives you the sort of comfort level and the confidence level to knock it out on the first try.
Right. Samantha's got a question.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. I was wondering, when is it the appropriate time, or how should we measure when to decide considering outside tutoring as opposed to, because I'm doing Khan Academy right now, like the online module, and I've been doing it for a few months, and I'm not sure whether I should seek out like extra guidance, like actual tutoring from Lsat tutors. So I don't know how to measure my progress.
Well, again, I think, okay, let me ask you this. You said you've been watching Khan Academy videos. Have you taken practice tests?
Yes, I've taken 4 at this point, and I have not seen much improvement at this
Right. I mean, I think, in terms of tutoring, I guess maybe the best way for me to describe it is, if you feel like you're stuck, right? Or, or if you feel like there's something that the tutor can provide that you can't figure out on your own. And so, and it's not, again, there's no formula. It's like, the best time to start on tutoring is 3 months out or 2 months out or 1 month out or anything like that. I think it's, if, like you described the situation where scores weren't really going up and nothing was happening, that may be a good indicator that you want to talk to somebody. But I think it's more sort of situational based rather than time based, if that makes sense.
I think that's a good answer for that, because that's kind of, if when you get to the point where it's like what I'm doing isn't really, moving me up, I think that it's a good time to try to get some advice about what might help you. And that was going to be my question too, is how many practice tests have you taken? And, at 4, you might be at the point of, well, maybe I should take another, but, there's also that idea of maybe I should talk to someone about it. We're right at 6:30. Were there any other questions that you all? I'm going to make a shameless plug for Mike. He is a private LSAT tutor. I have him here because he's my friend, and I don't get a kickback, because I always appreciate the insights that he has about the test. But I can get his information for you. He's very modestly priced, and he will do, just like a one consultation, or he'll arrange a series of sessions for you. And guess what? I'm sure you can tell from this, the emphasis is very much on practice tests. Mike will have you take a practice test, and then we'll go over that practice test with you. And so you can start to get the feeling about how your practicing can help improve your scores. And he'll also do groups. If any of you are interested in that, you can get together. Well, I say groups, you'll do 2 people, right?
I'll do up to 3.
Okay. And so you can kind of split the cost of it, at that juncture. But he is really reminding me and emphasizing how important it is in preparation for this to take the practice tests. And LSAT, there's a lot of ways that you can find them out there. I get really angry at LSAT for their continuing charging for things, but they do at lsac.org have 70 plus practice tests that you can get for $99. And I think having the availability of tests like that online is probably worth the price that you're paying for that. Any final thoughts, sir?
Absolutely. I would say if you're going to, if you have a certain amount of money that you're going to dedicate toward LSAT preparation, the absolute top of the list would be the data bank of the practice tests. More important than, I'm cutting against my own self-interest here, but more important than any tutoring you could get, more important than any other books you could buy or anything else, the place to start is with that test data bank.
Yeah. And the other thing I will emphasize that Mike said is it's very much like working out, is that's why the practice is so important, is that you can't expect to, get to lifting 50 pounds until, you have, practiced and practiced and practiced. And the ultimate goal is when you sit down to take the test, to have done so many practice tests that you're just in that relaxed state. So when you open it up, you are thinking, I have done this so many times. So I know now that I'm just going to, my brain is just going to do the test. Right. Thank you, Mike.
Sure. Great to talk to you all.
Yeah. And thank you everyone for coming. And, we're going to record this and post it. If you have any friends who, weren't able to see it, Ashley will have it up on the website. And so we're getting lots of thank yous coming in. That's always really nice. So everyone have a great weekend. And of course, if anyone, I always have to say this at the end, if anyone has any specific questions, like talking about gap years or getting prepared for the test anyway, reach out, make an appointment with me, and we can talk about it one-on-one. Okay, everyone. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for watching this video. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to First Generation Comments and click on the bell to make sure that you're notified every time we upload, premiere, and go live.